You ever seen one of these before?
Oh, I know those all too well.
Yeah, so we're working on the 59 Cadillac Eldorado Barritz in the next shop over there.
And you got a little problem there, it looks like.
Yeah, well, more than a problem. So these always break, and they always have problems with the rheostat. And this wonderful product that Caddy Daddy offers, I think you are probably the master of masters to be able to show everyone how it could go together.
Yeah, I've only worked on probably 100 of those.
Oh, here's 101.
Okay.
I put it in your hands.
Thank you. So what we have here is a 59 headlight switch. Some of the older cars don't have the dome light control on. There's just little variations, but they're all similar. And they all have a lot of springs inside. And that's where guys run into trouble when they try to take these things apart to either, like we have to do, replace the rheostat, or to try to clean the contacts or lubricate them internally. Out of the 6 springs, you have to deal with 5 of them. And there's one in particular that likes to take a flight across the room and disappear on you, which I learned the hard way. And so we're going to help you to do it so you don't have to learn the hard way. So the first thing we need to do is get this thing taken apart. And the spring that gives the most trouble is this detent spring that makes it, when we have the handle, that makes it click. So it's a fairly strong spring. It's got a guide rod in the middle, and it has 2 metal caps at the end. It often will be stuck in this metal cover. It will often stick in, but not always. I'm going to apply some downward force, just slight. Remove the 3 screws, and we will see what this one is going to do. We don't really need to worry about where this goes. If this falls loose, I can show you how that goes back together, so don't worry about that. Our job here is to catch this detent spring. In fact, I'm going to encourage all that to fall loose. And our detent spring should be in that groove. It's not. It's stuck in the top cover. You can see this is spring loaded and pushed up and allowed the detent spring assembly to come out of this plastic housing and end up right there. And what we don't want to do is to lose this assembly. It's made up of the end caps and the guide rod. That's the one that has a tendency to go flying across the room on you. So the other parts inside of the actual switch mechanism, we'll just dump them out. You have the contact plate. You have the little insulator block. You have 3 springs that are associated with the contact plate. You have the sliding assembly and the little latch. This is the part that engages in the shaft on the handle, that when you push down the outside pin, it pushes down and allows you to remove that. Then in the rheostat assembly area, you have the rheostat, and this one here is, usually they burn out. This one here has physical damage. This is the rheostat contact plate. There is our 5th spring in this top assembly. That puts pressure on the rheostat plate to make it make contact. And that's the insulator, and this is the dome light switch. And of course we have the main housing. If you've just taken yours apart, and what you want to do is clean all the pieces, and if you have an ultrasonic machine, you can throw them in there. A little detergent, it does wonders on cleaning all the old grease out. So I've got all the parts for this 1959 or 60 headlight switch all cleaned up and ready to be inspected and reassembled. The one part that we did know that we were going to need, because it was physically damaged, is the rheostat for the panel lamps. And the one we had was broken. Oftentimes the wires burn. And so this is a common part that needs replacement. And if you have to replace that, as you saw, everything else comes apart. So you might as well inspect your switch and lubricate it, make sure it's all in good order. Depending on availability, we do have at Caddy Daddy NOS switches and rebuilt switches. The first thing we're going to look at is this contact plate, which this one looks to be in very nice condition. Little tarnish on it, that doesn't hurt anything. If that bothers you, you can use some polish for copper or brass. The contact points aren't burned or scored, so that's good. Inside the housing, these all look good. Little wear is all. No burn spots. There's no cracks in the housing. The circuit breaker, it seems okay. Nothing is bent up. So this is a good candidate for us to rebuild and put back together. So we mount our insulating plate there, and we mount our 2 springs. Now we mount those springs from that side. Now this needs to have some electrical contact lubricant. Whatever you do, don't use a product with silicone in it. Silicone on these high current contacts, when there's arcing, it produces a residue that's an insulator, and it just will give you loads of trouble. So use your favorite non-silicon based electronics lubricant and contact conditioner. And what I find handy is to keep in my tool bag for when you're on the road I got some ignition grease in the bottom and some contact lubricant and cleaner in the top. All we're doing is trying to get into this housing, all the points where there's moving parts, and where that detent goes in the side of the housing, where the contacts run in the bottom. I like to put a little onto the springs, lubricate them to keep them from corroding. So you have a spring under each contact point. So that goes that direction with the 2 springs. Then when you turn the block over into this position, the handle has to come in somewhere, and there's only a hole on one side for the handle to come in. So that makes you set that in there like that. So if you just take your time and think about the basics, that you can only put it together correctly. And we'll drop in the other spring, give it some lubrication, lubricate the keeper. And so we're going to let that area there just sit in that state while we prepare the rest of it for assembly. We'll put a little treatment on there. We'll assemble the springs. We'll just set that there for right now. A little lubrication. Now this is the part we need to get into the correct order. As you saw when we disassembled the switch, it all just kind of falls to pieces on you. So the first piece is, this makes the contact, it shorts this to ground, this contact here to ground, and that's for turning on the dome lights. Yeah. So this plastic piece insulates, and that's the contact for the dome light. Then you have the spring, and then this will only fit one way. It may be difficult to see, but that flat is wider than that flat. So this will only fit onto the plastic the correct way. But you do have to make sure that the contact points are facing towards the rheostat itself. And then we slip all this together. And this is when it becomes handy to have multiple hands. So this will be mounted on top like that. Get all this oriented properly. The rheostat assembly then catches in the metal housing, and that can only go one way. You can see that that's a smaller, narrower, and it's a little bit wider and deeper. And now, to slip all this together, we will press in the detent spring, pick up the housing, and we very carefully, we keep downward pressure on everything as we slip it all together. Rheostat falls into place. Keep downward pressure on that metal cover. We don't want anything to be popping loose. Be very gentle tightening these screws. You don't want to crack the plastic. It gets a little bit brittle over all these years. Okay, now we have a rebuilt switch assembly. Now that we've got everything put back together, now we're ready to test. So I've made a little test setup here. I have a 12 volt power supply. You can use a battery. And I have a bank of resistors for a load with a test light across them, just so we have a visual indication. We'll be able to see both test light and on the amp meter that we're loading the supply down and the switch is conducting current. So the first thing we're going to test is simply the dome light switch. So we're going to connect just one clip to the housing and one clip to the dome light position. And there we go. Our light comes on. We have a current indication, 7 amps or so. So the dome light switch works. Now on these contacts here, this contact here is your main power in. And then you have your front parking lights, which are on in the first position, and your tail lights. And then in the second position, you have your tail lights and your headlights, and the front lights go out. It's common on the older cars that when you have the headlights on, that there's no marker lights on in the front. So the first thing we'll test is the front marker lights. So we pull the switch one position and we get an indication. Nice bright light, proper amount of current. This draws right now with this voltage, and that amount of resistance is 7.2 amps. So we don't have any loss in the switch. We pull one more position and it should go out. So we will go back to off. Now we're on the tail light position, which should be on both in the first and second position. So that is good. And now to the headlight. So in the first position it is not on, and in the second position it is. And the final thing to check is the dimmer, which is this contact right here. We'll make connection, and as you can see, the test light dims and brightens. So this assembly is all good and ready to be mounted in a car. And now you know how to replace your rheostat. It's available from Caddy Daddy. And how to clean the contacts and refurbish your switch so it gives you decades more of good service.
At Caddy Daddy Presents, it's all about giving back. Please enjoy the video of the Boys and Girls Clubs of St. Helena and Calistoga. donate by clicking the link in the video description.